Imagine the entire ocean gasping for breath, its most vital inhabitants on the brink of chaos. Yet almost no one notices until it is too late. That statement might sound like a line out of a dystopian novel, but it echoes a very real and urgent warning from scientists who study the tiniest life forms teeming in our seas. Why should you care about creatures so small that you can barely see them even under a microscope? Because they keep the entire planet breathing, that's why. Today we dive headfirst into one of the most enthralling scientific frontiers of our generation. The race to understand plankton before climate change outruns us all. We will unveil why these humble floating entities are key players in maintaining our atmosphere and feeding our food chains. And we will explore the passionate call from experts worldwide to update the tools we have relied on for decades. This story has more twists, more revelations, and more urgent stakes than any blockbuster thriller. In this episode, stick with me as we unmask the hidden drama unfolding in every drop of ocean water and learn how cutting-edge digital twin platforms might just help us safeguard our future. But first, let us delve into the heart of the problem. This is not merely about fish or whales. It goes deeper, to the fundamental building blocks of our oceans. Plankton may sound insignificant, tiny specks adrift among the tides, but do not be fooled. Without them, the oceanic food web would collapse, coral reefs would wither, and the oxygen supply that sustains life on our planet would be compromised in ways we can scarcely imagine. That is what is lurking beneath the surface. An unassuming yet apocalyptic scenario where outdated scientific models obscure our understanding of how these vital organisms actually behave. In this video, we will shine a revealing light upon the crucial gap between what scientists now know about plankton and how this knowledge remains glaringly absent in the digital simulations we use for resource management and climate projections. Got your attention? Great. Let us talk about the shaky house of cards we have been building when it comes to marine research and decision-making. In the next few minutes, you will hear the riveting details uncovered by over 30 marine and ecological experts from across the globe, culminating in a publication spearheaded by Plymouth Marine Laboratories Professor Kevin Flynn. This collaborative effort reveals that the plankton models we turn to, those digital frameworks that help us guess the future health of the oceans, rest on concepts that have not kept up with the latest scientific evidence. Think about it. We live in a world of constantly updated phone apps and sophisticated artificial intelligence. Yet, our key simulations for understanding the ocean rely on building blocks from nearly half a century ago. Today, we will examine why that is more dangerous than it might first appear, how these underrepresentative models can lead us astray, and what might happen if we keep overlooking the urgent need for a thorough upgrade. We will scrutinize how outmoded thinking can create illusions in our scientific projections, illusions that might neatly match our limited data but are fundamentally wrong in their assumptions. Thus far, we have only scratched the surface in acknowledging the monumental role that diversity plays within plankton communities. In truth, the variety of plankton types, from tiny photosynthetic algae to minuscule predators that devour each other at microscopic scales, is what makes the marine world tick. Yet, many models compress that kaleidoscopic complexity into a handful of generic categories. That might sound harmless, but it means we could fail to spot telltale red flags warning of biodiversity catastrophes. It is akin to describing every bird and mammal in the world as creatures with 4 limbs, and expecting that vague definition to answer critical ecological questions. This knowledge gap has profound effects on how we diagnose and predict climate change. Remember, plankton do not simply exist for the sake of existing. Photosynthetic plankton, often labeled as phytoplankton, breathe in carbon dioxide, generate oxygen, even more than the forests on land, and fuel the entire marine food web. When their diversity is underestimated or oversimplified, it becomes impossible to forecast which plankton communities will flourish or vanish as warming ocean temperatures, acidification, and pollution intensify. That trickles up the food chain in ways that can devastate fisheries, endanger marine mammals, and reshape entire coastlines. Plankton's adaptability is both wondrous and precarious, and ignoring their intricacy, ironically, might just be ignoring our own lifeline. Now, here is where the story takes an intriguing turn. Professor Flynn, along with his crew of over 30 global experts, did more than merely point fingers. They underscored the urgent need for scientists who gather empirical data, those collecting samples from tropical reefs and polar frozen waters, to collaborate more tightly with the coders and modelers who design the simulations. In other words, it is not enough to gather data about plankton distribution or feeding rates if that information never weaves its way into the core logic of our digital models. With climate change scenarios demanding more accuracy and urgency than ever, a single oversight in that web of information can mislead policies, hamper conservation efforts, and ultimately leave us all more vulnerable. But what exactly does improving the models mean in practical terms? The paper calls for rethinking the established one-size-fits-all approach to categorizing plankton. No more lumping thousands of species under a couple of labels like phytoplankton or zooplankton. Instead, it demands a bold leap, developing next-generation simulation frameworks that can account for real-world ecological complexity and a much wider range of biological functions, from nutrient absorption to predator-prey dynamics. These models also need to be built in a way that is accessible to scientists who are not coding experts. Imagine if the only way to use a phone was to know advanced software engineering. That would be unthinkable. The same logic applies to modernizing scientific tools for plankton research. We want oceanographers, biologists, and ecologists to shape these tools according to their data and fieldwork, without requiring them to become expert programmers. That is the inclusive, forward-thinking stance that this new wave of research champions. Speaking of forward-thinking, let me pause for a moment of reflection. If you find this as startling and fascinating as I do, would you let others know? That is my first gentle reminder to give this episode a quick, like if you are enjoying the revelations so far. A simple gesture from you can amplify the importance of this topic to more curious minds. After all, how often do we get to talk about phenomena that simultaneously connect climate change, biodiversity, technological innovation, and the entire future of marine life? On that note, let us continue, because I promise there is still much more beneath the surface. The paper does not just highlight problems, it hints at a revolutionary way forward, building what are being referred to as digital twin platforms. Think of a digital twin almost like a virtual mirror of the real ocean. This tool would be able to simulate the genuine biology, chemistry, and even physics of plankton communities in ways never before possible. Digital twins are not just a fancy gimmick. They could let scientists test out different climate scenarios, pinpoint how certain pollutants might shift a plankton population, or see how temperature changes might disrupt specific species. Picture an advanced simulation where, with the push of a button, researchers can watch how a tiny shift in ocean acidity would move through a plankton ecosystem like a domino chain, eventually affecting fish stocks, carbon storage, and oxygen output. This is the power that well-crafted digital twin environments hold. But building them requires more than just visionary coders. It demands synergy among marine biologists, ecologists, data scientists, policy experts, and more. Everyone has to talk in real time, cross-check assumptions, and validate the overarching model. The new publication from Plymouth Marine Laboratory, which feeds into broader initiatives linked to the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science, underscores that we cannot treat the modeling process like an afterthought. Instead, it must stand shoulder to shoulder with empirical research. Far from being arcane or niche, these enhanced models have enormous consequences for environmental management. If coastal fish populations appear poised to crash in a few decades, top-notch modeling can let policymakers intervene now, creating marine protected areas or imposing fishing regulations that could head off disaster. Conversely, inaccurate or oversimplified models might yield a false sense of security or prompt misguided policies that actually exacerbate problems. Let us paint an image. You are a scientist sailing on a research vessel, dropping nets into the water to collect plankton. You measure their distribution, their metabolic rates, perhaps how they interact with predators. You watch them under a microscope. Then you send your data to a large digital platform. Within hours, you see a visualization that updates the entire ocean's digital twin, adjusting the environment to accommodate the new details you have gleaned. That simultaneous feedback loop helps the entire scientific community make sense of the findings almost instantly. That is the bright promise on the horizon, but it hinges on immediate action and collaboration. If we fail to upgrade the conceptual frameworks embedded in our current models, we risk building digital illusions that impress us with fancy graphics yet remain fragile at their core. At this juncture, let us discuss how, only in the last few years, have scientists started to understand the dynamic interplay between planktonic species. Some produce unique chemical compounds that help neighboring organisms survive. Others alter their behavior or shape to fend off predators, especially as sea temperatures fluctuate. Some are incredibly sensitive to pH changes, which is alarming in an era of ever-increasing ocean acidification. By bundling these nuances into a vague notion of plankton, old-school simulators can leave us blind to subtle yet significant shifts. Hints of ecological upheaval might go unnoticed until they explode into full-blown crises, from harmful algal blooms that devastate coastal fisheries to the mass disappearance of keystone plankton species that prop up entire food webs. It is not a horror story we want to live through. Yet there is hope, powerful, layered, collaborative hope. The strides we have made in molecular biology, satellite monitoring, and high-resolution sensors can all come to the rescue. In previous decades, you might have had only scattered data points from region to region, but now scientists can track droplets of ocean water down to their genetic fingerprints. We are living in a golden age of oceanographic technology. But ironically, the best technology in the world still fails if the theoretical scaffolding behind it remains outdated. By modernizing those conceptual cores, we maximize the potential of all the new data we are gathering. That brings us to the multidisciplinary nature of the collaboration this paper champions. If there was a central theme in the author's arguments, it is that neither coding wizards working in isolation nor field biologists who despise computer models can solve this on their own. Field experts must see themselves as integral contributors to the simulation's code, infusing real-world complexities into the swirl of algorithms. We need to foster a sense of communal ownership over these models, because they do not belong solely to a narrow group of theoreticians. They belong to the entire planet. Let me tell you a short story for context. A few decades ago, experts believed that focusing on just one or two representative plankton species could reveal enough about the entire community's health. But as we studied more, it became clear that the synergy between, say, a photosynthetic algae and a particular predator might be the key to whether a vast region of ocean water chokes on toxic blooms or flourishes with marine life. Missing that subtle partnership left entire environmental assessments incomplete. It is precisely such revelations that drive the next chapters of ocean science. And for digital models to remain robust in the face of these revelations, they must be able to weave in ever more intricate pieces of data. Now, I can sense you might be wondering whether there is a place for regular citizens, people outside the direct realm of marine science, to help. The short answer is absolutely yes. Public awareness, like what you are showing by tuning in right now, creates momentum that can influence local and national policy. The decisions to fund new research or upgrade existing ones often hinge on how urgent the public perceives a threat to be. That is precisely why I urge you once again, in my second friendly call to action. If this deep dive into the fascinating world of plankton stirs your curiosity or concern, consider subscribing to Stay Connected. This community thrives on collective voices amplifying urgent scientific issues, and it would be a privilege to keep bringing you deeper into the heart of matters like these. If you do choose to stick around, what awaits you is an unending wellspring of discoveries. For one, we will look at how these refined models can forecast regional differences, like how plankton around coral reefs might respond to warming waters differently than plankton off the coast of colder regions. We may also explore how commercial fisheries can be impacted when the base of the food pyramid is shifting or vanishing. And perhaps most critically, we will discuss how carbon gets bound up within planktonic communities and eventually lost to deeper layers of the ocean. That process forms one of Earth's most vital carbon sinks. Yet, it remains precarious if we fail to appreciate what fosters or undermines plankton health and diversity. Transitioning to the big picture, we realize that this discussion is not just about oceanography. It touches on climate science, economics, public health, and even geopolitics. As sea levels rise and fisheries migrate, everything from international trade to coastal real estate can sway amid shifting ocean currents. Even if you have never set foot on a stage-illuminated research vessel, these developments can affect the seafood on your plate, the price of groceries, or the safety of coastal towns in your country. By updating our plankton models and forging stronger bonds between empiricists and modelers, we essentially secure one of the best vantage points on environmental changes that could otherwise spring nasty surprises upon us. This extends well beyond just fish stocks or coral bleaching. It extends to oxygen generation, carbon sequestration, and the fundamental resilience of marine ecosystems. Let us not forget that simulations come with their own set of enticements and pitfalls. On one hand, a truly cutting-edge digital twin can open up hypothetical scenarios that let us see with remarkable clarity how certain climate measures might play out decades from now. On the other hand, if the underlying assumptions are flawed, if our model lumps all forms of plankton into one big homogeneous group, for instance, all our fancy projections could be misguided. That is a point hammered home by the publication from Plymouth Marine Laboratory. They advocate for getting it right for the right reasons, not merely for results that coincide with partial data, but fail to capture the real essence of biological processes. That difference is what separates a reliable climate prognostication from a pipe dream. Now, picture a day in the not-too-distant future. Marine scientists will be teaching classes in advanced modeling, not as an abstract footnote, but as a fundamental tool as crucial as the microscope once was. New generations of students will learn that if you want to truly grasp how the ocean functions, you cannot just stick to field sampling or data collection. You must also become fluent, or at least conversant, in the language of modeling. They will see it not as a niche specialty, but as a seamless extension of standard marine science. That is precisely the cultural shift that this publication helps to catalyze. Like how molecular biology revolutionized our understanding of life processes in the latter half of the 20th century, advanced plankton modeling could revolutionize marine ecology in the coming decades. All of that spells out a clarion call for the scientific community, the policy world, and indeed, for every single one of us. If we do not embrace these new modeling principles, we risk being caught off guard by abrupt ecosystem shifts. If we do, we unlock a realm of possible solutions, from more sustainable fisheries management to better climate adaptation strategies, and even creative large-scale geoengineering proposals that might one day be tested as ways to combat climate emergencies. In other words, the stakes could hardly be higher, nor the story more relevant. To fill out the narrative, let us go back in time briefly. About 30 or 40 years ago, scientists were wrestling with how to fit biological details into climate models that were originally built around physical and chemical variables, like temperature and salinity. Plankton communities were often tacked on as an afterthought, only partially integrated. Fast forward through years of incremental improvements, and we now find ourselves blessed with sophisticated satellite observations, gene sequencing breakthroughs, and global collaborations. Yet the fundamental core logic of many old models has not evolved at the same pace. This new wave of research, culminating in the collaborative publication with Plymouth Marine Laboratory, changes that dynamic. It calls upon us to rewrite the rules so that modern technology meets modern biology. The synergy that results could reconfigure environmental science in ways reminiscent of how digital technology changed communication on a global scale. One might ask why this is happening right now. Part of it is sheer necessity. Global warming and other anthropogenic pressures are revealing cracks in our assumptions faster than ever. We no longer have the luxury of ignoring the complexities that exist beneath the ocean's surface. Another part is that we finally command the technology that can process enormous data sets, whether gleaned from satellite imagery or localized field stations. Combine those factors with a sense of urgency from the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science, and you can see the perfect storm that is compelling a comprehensive overhaul of our models. This is not a doom and gloom scenario, though. Beneath all the scientific disclaimers lies a wave of optimism that by knowing more, we can do more. We might save pristine coral reefs from acidification. We might preserve precious fisheries that feed entire communities. We might even keep our atmospheric balance in a more stable state by optimizing the carbon sequestering powers of plankton. Unlike some other grand challenges that seem to yield few concrete solutions, the message here is that with the right approach, we can indeed bend the trajectory away from disaster. That approach is the careful synergy of empirical science and advanced modeling. Now, as we near the finale of our deep dive, it is clear that the story of plankton is really the story of us all, told in miniature. In each of these countless organisms, we see how the fundamental processes of life and Earth's climate interlink. The call from Kevin Flynn and other leading experts to modernize plankton models is not just an academic footnote. It is a rallying cry that resonates across the broader tapestry of environmental stewardship. As daunting as the challenge might be, every new study, every improved simulation, And every plankton sample that is meticulously analyzed takes us one step closer to forging a more sustainable balance between humanity and the ocean. Once again, do not let the size of plankton fool you. These unassuming drifters have exerted an unimaginably huge influence on Earth's chemical and biological evolution. They are intimately enmeshed in how our planet breathes, and they hold vital clues to how we can continue breathing in a rapidly changing world. If you have journeyed with me this far, congratulations. You now belong to a special circle of people who recognize the epic drama unfolding in the ocean's invisible realm. Plankton might be the underdogs in this tale, but they are far from powerless. Their collective might can dictate the fate of entire ecosystems, plus our own future security. As the scientific community attempts to move past these outdated conceptual barriers, the question is no longer whether we should update our plankton models, but how fast and how well we can do so. With that, we wrap up our exploration of this pivotal crossroads, one that merges cutting-edge research, urgent ecological missions, and the intelligence of global collaboration. Thank you for listening, and remember, the ocean's greatest secrets often lie in the smallest forms of life.